Garo really is grimdark Power Rangers. It's really involving morphing. There's a mantle that's handed down from generation to generation, and it all comes from a mysterious, magical force that no one's really sure of how it works. Not to mention the powers change from season to season, as do the monsters. The exact specifics of how it works and why it works doesn't really matter. What matters is that there's an archetype to maintain and horrible consequences that happen in the world if you don't, namely in Garo, blood, gore, and guts everywhere, because someone has turned into a monster, because the archetype of the knight and the hero was not lived up to. No one was there to protect the innocent, and so monsters and what are effectively called horrors, but are ultimately demons and archetypally demons, have been able to run amok in the world. As I said, Garo differs from season to season, but basically every version of Garo takes place in a universe where it's very easy for humans to become monsters called horrors, oftentimes tempted by demons, but sometimes just consumed by negativity. In this world, the only people capable of stopping them are Makai priests. There exists a warrior rare offshoot of Makai priests called Makai Knights. Makai Knights are much rarer than Makai priests. There's a lot of work that goes into Makai Knights, much more training goes into them. They basically have the training in many ways of a priest, usually, plus the athletic and harsh training, plus nobility training of a knight, literally, and then after that, they have the training of having a specific armor accept them. Sometimes this can only be done by bloodline in some universes. In other universes / seasons of Garo, it can be done just straightforward. We see that with Zero, Black Blood, and also the Ray version of Zero the Silver Wolf, who is ultimately accepted as an adopted son of the Knight Armor family. And then we also see Hermon in a different season, who is also Zero the Silver Wolf, but he is straightforward and very specifically outlined from a bloodline. Each Makai Knight, based on their armor, also has specific powers. An example of a specific pact, for example, that the Golden Knight has is a pact with the demon Zaruba to increase his own power. To do this, he has to have a pure heart to always resist the demon's temptations, and while it differs, the demon feeds off of his life force. This is expertly done in the version of feeding off of his life force that exists in the first thing we're going to be talking about, which is Garo the Animation, in which it is the night of the new moon that he must stay indoors because Zaruba is feeding off of his life force at that time. He literally loses a night of the month, which is very interesting. Of the existing Garo media, that is to say movies and TV shows, not counting the video game, of which I deeply recommend Visit's video on the Garo game, I will be telling you about 8 sections of Garo. That's what I've divided these into, based on watch order and how you should watch them. And you can disagree or agree in the comments below if you're familiar with the franchise, or you can tell me what you think of the franchise in the comments below as well. And, of course, spoiler warnings, because this is a freeform video and spoilers may fly from my mouth without me thinking. Be warned, non-copyright Garo-themed B-roll is very hard to find, so you will more or less be listening to a podcast for this entire video, with simple pictures in the background showing you which show that I'm generally talking about in relation to Garo. Without further ado, let's begin. Grimdark. Half off! If you'd like to see my progress as I make new content, enlist today through YouTube memberships or Patreon to become a soldier in the Grimdark Legion. My thanks to the men and women who've already served, whose names are listed here. You keep darkness at an affordable price. So this list is thematic in nature. That is to say, whatever I feel best represents Garo is generally what's going to be on here. I'll give you kind of my criteria for great versus okay. Great seasons of Garo do something unique with the existing knights they have available, oftentimes doing less with more. They have season-specific knights in some cases, which oftentimes come with their own uniqueness and character tied to them. They also have a tragedy as a constant theme, and more or less when I say tragedy as a constant theme, I mean constant. I should not be happy in any of these episodes. I should be sad, contemplative. It's a very stoic show in that way. And then finally, in keeping with Stoicism, there's a no easy way out theme from almost every single one of these shows that I've listed here. There's almost always a kind of, man versus utopia aspect. Not to be confused with being the main theme. It's not that that's the main theme, but there is a man versus utopia aspect in many of the seasons. So, we move into an okay season of Garo. They get the archetype of the Makai Knight or the demon-slaying knight right. He's a hero, he shows up in the darkness, and I'm going to go ahead and spoil this for you for the later in the video. This is pretty much the 2005 to 2013 Kauga or Raiga live-action series. That's what the OK seasons of Garo are. They're nothing memorable. Almost every single one of these are episodic. The villains are forgettable. Tragedy is less present because ultimately there's always kind of an uplifting tone at the end. And the spin-offs, which I've listed in the better section, are actually better than the OK seasons. When we go into the truly bad seasons, truly bad stories are pretty universal, sadly. In terms of both watch order and quality, I would deeply recommend Garo the Animation is what you should watch first. This is because, at the end of the day, it is far better than the 2005 series when it comes to being an introduction to the universe, but also where better for a knight story than medieval Spain, which is where the story takes place, our titular Golden Knight being, in this case, Leon. Leon is a wonderful character who goes through a 5-star hero's journey. He genuinely loses his purpose, regains his purpose. You will see an emotional roller coaster from this kid as he loses his mother, and both him and his father, who is Hermon, Zero the Silver Knight, in this series, have to deal with that. It is filled with character drama and show don't tell storytelling that is just so good. It cannot be recommended enough. Obviously, when it comes to doing something unique with the existing knights, Garo and Zero are, in this cases, literally related, which is not done in any of the other seasons. They are part of a familial drama that will only expand more on their family line as the season progresses in ways that I am not trying to spoil for you, but what I will say is that someone else becomes the Golden Knight when Leon shows that he cannot handle the power. And one of the greatest moments is seeing Leon genuinely mature as an adult human, winning the affections of a woman who used to tease him about how immature he was. He does not grow in size or stature, but his soul and his mind and his maturity grows, and that is recognized, and that earns the favor of both women and his new family alike. His new family, which had a much more healthy upbringing than him, and who he is now able to connect with because he puts himself aside and he now joins with this new family member in this crusade of helping others, this selflessness, which is so overwhelmingly beautiful. Now, in addition to that, you also have that family drama, which again really does revolve around Leon, and Leon becoming his own man. But you also have Hermon, and Hermon, who is mainly lecherous. He does have a lot of negative qualities to him. He's trying to sleep with everything that moves after the death of his previous wife, who held the bloodline of the Golden Knight. Now, of course, his reasoning for this is that he still has to pass down his armor, which is, of course, the Silver Knight armor, which he can't do if again, remember, the rules change each season. In this season, it's about bloodline, and which he can't do unless unless he has a specific heir. The thing that always shows is that while this is how he more or less blows off steam, it's a comforting ruse that allows people to let their guard down around him because they think less of him because he is so lecherous. After that, he then slays and kills monsters and horrors. One of the best characterizations of his character happens in episode 1. Again, show don't tell storytelling. We see him go into a brothel where a horror is disguised as a prostitute. And of course, he lets the horror prostitute assume that he is just another patron of her fine wares, let's say. And as she goes to kill, he very quickly morphs, takes her out, and then moves on with his day very quickly. The other thing is that while fights aren't realistic, obviously we don't want realistic fights in a superpower show, or at least I don't. The thing with the time limits of when they will be knights is also very cool because it's not uncommon for fights to last a millisecond and then morph out. and the main focus of the story to be around tragedy, which is just something that's very cool about Garo. So when it comes to season-specific knights, we have Gaia, the Knight of Defense. He's a very cool purple and gold color scheme and an executioner's hammer kind of sword, a weighted kind of axe-like sword that is very cool, weighted at the top, of particularly heavy. It's said to require an extra amount of physical strength to lift and use. This is something that is communicated through the training of using the armor rather than anything said specifically. But Gaia, the Knight of Defense, does require more physical strength to use. It's also something that is bound to the idea of protecting the children of the world more so than other knights' armors. Or other knight armors seem based in general protection. We see a very big focus on duty and commitment here. That is very, very just awesome. Also, another thing when it comes to existing knights is that the soap opera-like drama... Okay, so this is a spoiler warning for the Dark Knight in Garo the Animation. There's almost always a Dark Knight in each of these seasons. And the Dark Knight is someone who was a Makai Knight but broke an oath. In this case, the oath in Garo the Animation is very harsh. And that is that you can never harm another human, meaning you can't fight, you can't punch them, you can't kick them, you can't get into a fist fight, the whole 9 yards. You can't harm humans, you can only harm monsters. Or at least you can only raise your blade against monsters when it comes to your powers. And ultimately, when Makai Knights are being falsely persecuted as heretics in Spain, in this basically Inquisition, what happens is this knight, he morphs to go save and avenge his comrades, and in doing so breaks his oath and, becomes a horror, becomes a dark knight. And that is his story. It's one that's very tragic and one that really hits to the inherent unfairness of Garo, because when I'm talking about the archetypal nature of the Golden Knight and how important it is to live up to that role, make no mistake that I'm not saying that we live in a fair world and that all it takes is you, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps to make the world a better place. No, it doesn't. It takes you embracing a deeply unfair aspect of the world, and one that takes a hell of a lot to adjust to. Your life is about adaptation, suffering, and often facing down deeply unfair circumstances. You ultimately cannot judge him for his dark turn, no more than you could judge anyone for it. It's very dark, but in a soap opera-like fashion. This, of course, was the former love interest of the woman who would pass down the golden armor to Leon and would later marry Hermone, who was Leon's mother. So this also was a former love interest, which is very cool. So season-specific knights in that way are very good. Tragedy is a constant. Yes, there is pretty much no point at which you will be happy. There is just episode 4 alone is just an entire episode about how humans are more cruel often than monsters, and how an entire village has basically, through hysteria, been convinced that this intelligent sort of kid or woman were witches and decided to burn and or hang them, and they just have to watch it happen. And that is just the awful tragedy of human nature. It's a nightmare. Then finally, No Easy Way Out that I pretty much talked about the Dark Knight. That is definitely fulfilled, but also in the sense that, what would you say? What would you say? That there are several instances in which Leon, after he loses his purpose, he kind of loses his memory as well. And there's a short few episodes where he loses his memory, and he's offered the ability to take a drug that will keep him in the state that he's in, where he can go and take the identity of a lost boy and more or less grow up in a village, find a girl, marry the girl, and move on, all while the children of the town are being preyed upon by a horror that he can choose to ignore and let the children be taken, all while he gets to move on with his happy life. Ultimately, he chooses to embrace his duty and face the horror, even though he himself does not have the armor to do so. In addition to that, you also have his another example of that is when he goes and gets a farmer girlfriend in the little area. He again tries to leave behind the life of a Makai Knight, and he's matured, he's grown at this point. He's ready to come back as a Makai Knight, but he doesn't know it yet. And that's the cool thing. That's when you start getting those tasty vibes, like, power is coming. But Yes, that I cannot recommend Garo the animation enough. That should be everyone's first season of Garo, without a doubt. And of course, my last reason, as well as reason for number 2 on this list, is that it has an English dub, and I'm recommending this to a Western audience. You absolutely should watch the English dub. The English dub is phenomenal, and specifically Hermone's voice actor does an amazing job of constantly selling and emoting every scene he's in a way that the Japanese dub simply doesn't. Number 2 on this list, and taking place in the United States of America, is Garo Vanishing Line. It is the 3rd animated season of Garo. It also has an English dub. And this time we get to start off with a fully mature and in his element Golden Knight, someone who kind of has the ferocity or virality of Hermone from Garo the animation, but also has that position of Golden Knight in America. And what's beautiful about it is, in this version, and remember, we're already in a new season. In a new season, the powers might work slightly differently, the horrors might work slightly differently. In this one, it seems to be much easier to be consumed by your own sorrow and become a horror, but there's also several instances of making deals with demons or demons already existing in the world that turn people into horrors by offering them temptations. Great example of that is a marathon Olympic athlete who is now in a wheelchair. He is offered the chance to run again, but in exchange for this, he now becomes a demonic speedster who runs through the night, consuming innocent people to be able to keep up his health and vitality. Right, anyway, the Golden Knight Garo, aka Sword in this one, is what's beautiful is he's an American, and what he does for his Garo training is that he's very clearly a weightlifter and all-American boxer. Now, he also has a job out of a Chinese food restaurant, and he frequently talks to the previous Garo, who was a older Chinese man who seemingly passed on the sword to him. So he's an example of swords adopting people into their families. Again, people are getting adopted into these armored families. That is something we see happen with Rey in the later live-action series that I'll be talking about. But when it comes right down to it, Sword is a phenomenal character. He is straightforward. He doesn't need to mature. He doesn't need an arc. The real drama in this season comes from when we talk about them doing something unique with existing knights and also properties, comes from our Makai priest character, Luke. And again, spoiler warning, spoilers for Garo Vanishing Line. His father was the Zero the Silver Knight. Luke's father was Zero the Silver Knight. His name, as well as mine, is Chris. And Chris is basically this fellow who is our Dark Knight of the series as well. So again, it's less is more. We don't see another Makai Knight probably the whole series, but man, does Sword carry it and does Luke carry it. Luke's Makai Knight style with the guns, I mean, between the guns, the weightlifting, and the boxing, this is an all-American season of Garo, which I can't help but love. Speaking of which, Sword's diet, which is very funny, consists of cheeseburgers, steak, fries, obsessively gorging himself on fast food. Zaruba in this one is not a ring, but rather he is a motorcycle. He's built into Sword's motorcycle, which also, by the way, transforms with him when he turns into Garo, which I love. But yeah, in terms of our criteria here, does something unique with the existing knights. In terms of Zero the Silver Knight becoming a Dark Knight, this is the first time that's happened. It ultimately limits the number of knights we see, so there's no season-specific knight, but the uniqueness of Zero becoming a Dark Knight and Chris's character of being someone who was a Makai Knight but was driven literally just to get more and more power and become a better, stronger sword duelist, and also leads to the drama of Luke. It leads to why he was abused as a kid, and he has this entire more or less complex about the idea of him being weak and constantly needing to logically prepare for everything. A big part of Luke's character is that he's very guarded. He's someone who uses logic as an excuse to not get close to people and not value human life. And as he begins to shed that, and he begins to fight and truly risk his life and truly bleed for what he believes in, despite his seemingly physically weaker aspect and just this willingness to die, this courage in his heart. Again, a big spoiler. I'm giving you a warning about spoiler. By the end, his hero's journey is complete and he becomes Zero the Silver Knight. That is cool to me, just because this is a first of having a Makai priest that we see go through a hero's journey of becoming a knight, and also seeing the tragic downfall of a Zero the Silver Knight. And also the idea that Zero the Silver Knight in this one does not use his iconic daggers, which he used both in the Rei saga and with Hermon, but instead uses a sword, which I found very interesting as well. Now, when it comes to tragedy as a constant theme, yes, this is done very, very well. I talked before about the possibility of man versus utopia, or I may have deleted that audio, but man versus utopia is a theme you'll see reoccurring in different seasons of Garo, especially the one who shines light into darkness, which we'll talk about soon. But effectively, there's this idea of a grand paradise existing out in the world that, surprise, surprise, is just a conspiracy for horrors to more or less get more souls and get more people to consume. But in addition to that, you have all these mini stories. I talked before about the marathon runner who has to go and consume flesh to survive, and ultimately is someone who needs to be slain and put out of his misery so that others can live. So yes, almost all of these are fulfilled. Again, with the uniqueness of Chris's character, I would say season-specific Knight is fulfilled. And then we have No Easy Way Out as a theme. There is a constant focus on that. And specifically with the young girl, I can't quite remember her name. I think her name... No, it's not Gina. Gina is the Makai priestess that they talk to. Come on. I'm tired. Sophie. Sophie is her name. Sophie is the young girl who more or less wants to get to paradise. She thinks she'll find her brother, but also there's this hidden feeling that maybe she'll also go there and find she'll find, oh, hey, this is paradise. I'll never have to work again. I'll never do anything. But when she gets there, she finds a horrifying tragedy that rips both her faith in humanity and her family apart. And there's a big debate over whether or not to erase her memory. And here's the thing I won't ruin. I won't ruin that for you. But there's a big ethical debate after that over whether or not to erase her memory of the occasion. Number 3 on our list, and possibly it's the second shortest on the list in terms of episodes. At only 12, we have Fang of God, also called Fang of God Jinga. This focuses on a lone Makai knight, the Rose Knight, Jinga. He is not Garo, he is not the Golden Knight, and his entire story is the tragedy of how someone would fall and become a Dark Knight. This is something that I think should be third in your watch order, because when we talk about consequences in the Garo universe, we start off with Garo the Animation, which introduces you. Then we move you into Garo Vanishing Line, which shows you the consequences of becoming a Dark Knight through it being one of the only 2 knights you really get to focus on, being Garo and also Zero. In this case, it's Zero the Dark Knight. But then with 3, it's just a true focus on the fall of Dark Knights. An introduction to Dark Knights, escalation of the Dark Knight being kind of the main villain in a way, not really, but kind of a main villain in the way, in the sense that he's the Darth Vader kind of red herring. He's not the Palpatine behind things. And then when it comes to the third one, it is just the main character. Eventually, this leads to a confrontation. Jinga's entire anti-hero's journey, villain's journey, leads to a confrontation with Zaruba. Now, one of the reasons, and this is actually really great, Zaruba gives him a very basic test of an easy way out. A simple, easy way out to fulfill in the spirit of Jinga. We'll go through our list in reverse order. He offers Jinga an easy way out of bringing his brother back to life, of saving lives, of magically bringing people back to life, and altering history, altering the past. Basically, sorcery and evil in exchange for what would maybe be his soul. And he instantly gives in. Zaruba laughs his ass off and says, "You fool, if you were as worthy as Garo the Golden Knight, you would have a pure heart, and you would reject that instantly." And so we can easily say that that theme is without a doubt met. Tragedy is a constant. The whole point of the show is tragedy. That works. Season-specific Knight, that's definitely taken care of by Jinga the Rose Knight, or the Light Dark Knight. That's definitely very, very cool. And then unique take on existing Knights, which is that they're legends and not very present, which, yeah, I would say all of that is fulfilled. So third on your list should be Jinga, Fang of God, and it is easily my favorite of them. I enjoy seeing his slow twist. It all starts with his inability, because at the start of the show, Jinga is just your average Makai Knight, and that's not to say he's average in any way. His life is basically a series of constant combat training. He has to take care of his little brother, and he has a not love interest, not girlfriend, but ultimately love interest and girlfriend, Makai Priestess, who he hangs around. He actually has it better than most people. He basically has a girlfriend, and he already kind of has his adopted brother with an age difference enough to basically be kind of like an adopted son. And you have that, and he doesn't know how good he has it. Slowly over time, he loses it. He doesn't know how to react to it because he never appreciated it in the first place. He has a mental breakdown, and he more or less becomes desperate and also has several false ideas, an identity disorder where he's willing to go out and kill people and just rain hell down on the world. In many ways, he's already fallen to darkness, but refuses to acknowledge that part of him. And it's actually unique as a take on a Dark Knight because the good half of him is still able to turn into the Rose Knight and kill horrors, but then the dark half of him is genuinely this kind of murderous, like is genuinely a serial killer. His aesthetics are very much like Devil May Cry. It's a live action series, but they do a good job of me feeling like there's a devil trigger involved. But yeah, no, he kills like the teacher of Makai Knights at a dojo. He kills quite a number of different people in that way. And this switching back and forth between the two personalities eventually culminates in, as I said, the Zaruba temptation, and he fails almost instantly. Eventually, this results in him becoming a demonic horror. It's a tragedy. And it's, again, huge spoilers, a demonic horror who feeds on other horrors, a Dracula-like anti-horror horror who feeds on other horrors, a demon-eating demon, a cannibalistic horror. And it's very cool, very interesting. Again, Fang of God, can't recommend it enough. The reason I can talk about all 8 of these sections of Garo is that Garo is not something you pontificate upon for 9 million years. There isn't really a big lore to Garo, given that the lore changes every season. There's an archetype, a story, and various stories that, you want to watch because they're going to leave an impact on your soul, and they're very cathartic in that way. How much can you beat up your main character and not have them die? Which is effectively writing 101. And you're seeing it on display in pretty much every season of Garo. Maybe even the bad ones. If you want to bring your own horrors to life on the tabletop, then you'll need today's sponsor, Ronin Craft. Ronin Craft is an independent 3D model printing service with an excellent customer review score on Etsy. With an expert focus in both fantasy and sci-fi, you're looking for your one-stop shop in all your urban horror fiction needs. Now, with Ronin Craft, and you might tell this from the name, you'll get quality that surpasses any master. You see, Ronin is a samurai without a master, and you get Ronin Craft is quality that surpasses any master. There you go. For the last on our list of great Garo stories, the best Garo stories you will ever watch or read, we have The One Who Shines Light into Darkness. It's a coming-of-age and redemption story as the main character gets over the suffering and trauma of losing their parents and loved ones, which caused them to become a traveling orphan, represented by the majority black and soot-like substance on the golden armor, making it shine not so brightly. And this is, of course, a darker, more angsty Garo. Ryuga is his name. And it's a very interesting story. We also get 2 new knights, but let's go through our list. So, unique take on an existing knight? Absolutely. We have a trauma-based figure who goes into a futuristic city, and I should explain the plot first. He goes into a futuristic city where, much like before, as we talked about in Garo Vanishing Line, he is someone who is facing a utopian world, a place that claims to be a utopia, but as you may have guessed, is actually a farm for horrors to get food. When people claim that they are ascending or getting a better place to live, usually it's a sign that they're never going to be seen again because they're going to be eaten. This is actually shown in a great tragedy with one of the season unique knights that we have in this episode, where they are befriending and almost romancing a young woman. And over time, they become more and more connected, and he's just trying to save her family, and he doesn't know what to do because actually an element here, because the thing about Garo up until this point is that it's really been an action show, because none of them really have secret identities. If you're a Makai Knight, it's what you do. You spend every day training when you're not in the armor or killing monsters. You're training to kill monsters when you're not killing monsters. This character, his name is Takaru. I'm not going to give away his cool knightly name until we get to that section here, but his name is Takaru. He is trying his best to save this girl without revealing his secret identity, and by the end we do see her get caught, get taken, and she is eventually ripped apart by horrors, and we have to watch that, and he has to find her. He has a mental breakdown. He doesn't know what to do because he couldn't save her. He couldn't save her, and it breaks him. And it's so amazing for his character, because his character is defined by being a hothead. And this is ultimately what happens when he gets, for the first time, I think, locked in analysis by paralysis. And it's very cool. So we have the main character, Garo, who's going through trauma of losing a family, making himself a traveling orphan. We have a large-scale conspiracy to farm humans for horror food, as is usually the case with more complex and more powerful horrors. They're usually smart enough to do that, and this is a very common trap. And we have, now that we're going to go through this, 2-season unique knights. We have the darkness on the armor that is a more or less symbol of the trauma of Ryuga. When he gets over that trauma, more and more of that blackness chips off, and he is able to shine more brightly as the true Golden Knight. He also gets the season-specific knights of the Heavenly Bow Knight Guy, who is bright blue, and the Flaming Blade Knight Zen, who is bright red. Takaru being the Flaming Blade Knight, and a fellow named Aguri, who reminds me a lot of, and is almost a carbon copy of, Uryu from Bleach, because Uryu also had a bow and was a nerd and constantly did the thing with the glasses where he goes, he's adjusting his glasses, let me tell you. Another element of tragedy. I talked before about the Takaru story and how he couldn't really help that girl. Well, that's because the knights are actually outlaws in this city. They have to be in this city to fight horrors, but inherently they are persecuted and demonized. And it's really cool because you get to see a modern day or not too distant future version of when the Makai priests and Garo the animation were being persecuted basically through an inquisition. And this is very similar. There's actually a super cop that has to constantly do battle with Ryuga, and their fight scenes are actually very good because Ryuga is constantly trying to follow. Again, it's a new season, so we don't know if it's like you throw a punch in a human's face with the intent to kill and that transforms you into a horror, but we know that Ryuga does not want to hurt humans for one reason or another, namely because he is a Makai Knight. And so it's constantly him dodging, trying to give them space, and them coming after them, and this person, this super cop, more or less matching him in athleticism, despite the fact that he is at peak athlete levels. So this is very, very cool. It's very interesting when you see that, but again, being outlaws in the area you want to protect. Very cool as a concept. They also have, again, it weirdly reminds me of Ninja Turtles without Leonardo. Like, the main character is kind of Raphael. He's a violent hothead. The Flaming Blade Knight is basically someone who genuinely does view himself as a superhero. Takaru, he is Michelangelo. And then Aguri is Donatello. But generally speaking, I really do think that these characters, and of course Aguri has a very simple story, which you can probably guess from his character being a Poindexter type, is that he generally suffers from analysis by paralysis, or rather paralysis by analysis, blah, 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 and he has to get over that, and that is effectively his very simple, straightforward story arc. You also have a Makai priestess and a Makai priest, so you get a good intro into that world. I know I haven't focused too much on the Makai priests and priestesses, but honestly, if this show was just about that, I don't think anyone would watch. I think that's just they would watch, but it's a very different show without the Makai Knights, who are really the story heads, the center fulcrum of it. And honestly, I really like Makai Knights. They're very easy to homebrew because you don't have to worry about them being the same color. They're more based off of something, like as long as it's poetic and stands for something. Like honestly, my favorite one is Jinga's formerly good form, the Rose Knight. Just that is it, the Rose Knight, and it's black and red, and it's here to break and kill horrors. I love that quite a bit. So, tragedy is a constant theme. Season-specific knights, we got that. Unique take on existing knights, absolutely. And also, this is one of the only seasons, I wanted to say this before, it's one of the only seasons without Zero the Silver Wolf. This is literally one of the only seasons, but it's also one of the best seasons of Garo, and that's an example of it. Zero the Silver Wolf is a constant in almost all the seasons I think of. Actually, yeah, except for this one and one we'll talk about eventually when we get to the bad seasons versus Road. It's yeah. There's just not. There really isn't a season without Zero the Silver Wolf. But this is one of them, and it's very good. They're not afraid to go to new areas and new places. No easy way out theme? Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say that this is the entire point of the entire show, is that if you try to get to a utopian state in a simple, matter of luck lottery way, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And, more or less figuring things out for yourself is going to be better than trying to rely on a dependent system that will likely screw you over. So yes, moving on. It's a very good season. Can't recommend it enough. Again, if you really want this video to live up to its name, honestly, start with The One Who Shines Light into Darkness, because also it'll get you used to subtitles, and you'll feel spoiled by the English dubs, which of the Garo the Animation and Garo Vanishing line. Sure, but again, I like this watch order because we have Garo the Animation, which introduces you to the universe, Garo Vanishing line, which teaches you that interesting things, the 4 criteria I basically set up. It teaches you that unique things can be done with these nights, more stories can be told basically, there can be season-specific nights in the sense that, different things can be done with them and make them into new things. Tragedy is a constant, so that's kind of the solemn, somber feel there, and No Easy Way Out as a theme is very cool. But, that further hampers down on the themes. It also teaches you how the powers can change by season. But then you have Fang of God, and the reason I say that should be third is that it just emphasizes tragedy and emphasizes what a Knight's Fall really looks like and how easy it is. It's a slow, slippery slope of just, I'll make one excuse here and one excuse there. And it all starts with not taking full care and full gratitude for what you have already. And then we have The One Who Shines Light into Darkness. And The One Who Shines Light into Darkness is basically spoiling you with Garo. 2 season-specific nights. Just an entire series that's a little bit longer, I think. It was about 30 episodes. That's a bit more than the initial 24 of both of those and 12. So, again, just an amazing one. And it's also the capstone of our great seasons of Garo. Because what comes next is okay. Basically, it will feed your Garo fix, but it's not the same as the 4 seasons we've gone over. So again, that's Garo the Animation, Garo Vanishing Line. It is Fang of God, and it is The One Who Shines Light into Darkness. All 4 of those are prime Garo. I definitely recommend them. If you're going to watch any of the ones on this list and count out the others, count out the ones that come after this, but watch those 4. I beg you, they are amazing, they are fun, and you will not regret it. It will leave an impression on you after you are done, and it will not be a bad one. Number 5 on our list is our bridge between great and okay, and that is Zero Black Blood, the 6-episode miniseries, followed by the movie Zero Dragon's Blood. Now, these aren't necessarily in chronological order, but they are part of the episodic spin-off of what was the 2005 to 2013 series. I wouldn't worry about that. What makes them better is that it is a 6-episode series telling a very succinct story that has a thorough plot line, as well as the movies, both being generally self-contained but having a longer time to tell their stories. Now, Ray, the Silver Knight for this general season, and also the Silver Knight present in the 2005 to 2013 series, so this won't be the last you see of him. He is a general loner kid who was adopted into a dying knight's family line and trained in the ways of Zero the Silver Wolf. And Zero the Silver Wolf then goes through Zero Black Blood is basically a Lucifer-like horror. He has the 6 wings and everything, teaching people how, horrors and humans can live in peace, and how, no, the horrors can only feed off the dregs of society, but of course, that gets out of hand. Eventually, he romances a woman. He genuinely believes in his cause. He romances a woman, tries to marry her. Things just don't go well, and that ends both in the tragedy of the horror and the woman, but also the nightmare of course, it's Garo. A false utopia crumbles in on itself, and a knight has to emerge from the darkness to take care of the monsters that emerge from that crumbling false utopia. Then Zero Dragon's Blood actually deals with the entities that existed before the Makai Knights. Before the Demon Knights, there were the Dragon Knights. And the Dragon Knights focused on the idea not of slaying dragons, but that the person in question, named Adele, was actually raised, that's his knightly name, was raised by a Makai dragon. And this was a time before Makai Knights, so no one was around to save humans from these creatures. I'm not going to spoil the plot for you, but that alone, the lore alone, which is very rare in Garo to get tasty, tasty lore bits like that, where you learn more and more about this universe and how things existed before Makai Knights. And again, this is a different universe, so remember, what exists here doesn't necessarily exist in Vanishing Line. What exists in Vanishing Line doesn't necessarily exist in Garo the Animation, but Zero Dragon's Blood is worth the watch because of that kind of feeling of an older veteran versus a younger hothead. If you were to create actually a joined universe, the interesting thing about Zero Dragon's Blood is that you could create an entire timeline where dragons basically teach Adele, who's the first Dragon Knight and also the last surviving one, you teach him how to be dragons initially teach humans how to wield the Makai armor and how to have the powers of Makai Knights, who originally are called Dragon's Knights. And then from there, they get recruited by the Watchdog Association, and then from there, I suppose, take on their more wolf-like appearance. That's very interesting, and I would like to see what pacts were made with the Watchdog Association. So, the Watchdog Association is also something that changes every season. The Watchdog Association are basically the people who give the various Makai Knights their missions. They're basically, there's a horror near here, go here, go here, go here. And that's, it's very interesting because it's like, well, okay, how do we actually get here? How do we actually get from dragons to being given the missions? Because in this season that he's a part of, we do see that. We do see the Watchdog Association giving people knowledge, like, oh, okay, well, here's where the horror is. You go fight it. But also that they trust in these entities, which are very reminiscent of Fae or Pixies, where in lore, you know, they are immensely powerful, but they don't really have a concept of good and evil. They just want to kill horrors for some reason. And it's very interesting how morally ambiguous that group is compared to the dragon, who more or less was a rebel, the only creature that we know of that was a rebel horror that taught man how to slay horrors and gave them the power to do so. So that's very interesting, and I wish I could see more of that. I would love to create a joint Garo universe at some point. And to be clear, that's not to be confused with the plot of the movie. The plot of the movie has their own take on how Makai Order got the Knights' ability. But yeah, the Dragon Knights are basically who they learn that from. Now, firmly in the OK camp, we have the seasons that took place from 2005 to 2013, which are less than you think, of the Koga series. Now, the reason Koga does not really get a lot of, I would say, praise from me is that he literally is Batman with the Makai Knight armor. He doesn't really have much of a character to him. We see him training, we see him fulfill the duties of a Makai Knight, but as far as him personally, I don't know anything about the guy, and I don't find anything really memorable about him. It gets the story right, it gets the archetype right of the knight, but Koga ultimately feels like a vessel for the Makai Knight rather than being a character. Once you learn about a character, they're supposed to appear three-dimensional to you, and Koga simply isn't. Every episode is, well, episodic, and generally speaking, every horror is self-contained. The first episode really sets the tone for the entire series, which is that there is a horror in a painting, he has to save a young girl, and he does so. There is a slight overarching villain, but slight is slight, and I don't really find the villain very memorable. There is a Dark Knight at some point, but his motivations are not sympathetic. His suffering is not one that people would really care for. You can see how, for instance, Chris in Vanishing Line would have a lust for power. That's literally what his job is. His job puts immense pressure on him to be the strongest, and if he can't be the strongest, people will die. This eventually leads him to missing the forest for the trees, where he focuses only on getting stronger. Then you also have of course, Garo the Animation Dark Knight, who has that whole soap opera love interest with Leon's mother. But then, generally speaking, he inevitably has to go avenge fallen Makai Knights against humans. This causes his fall and transformation. Again, the villains are very forgettable. Tragedy is less present. They try to have a happy ending. This is really when the series was first taking off again. tragedy is less present. This is when they were making references. The whole thing was like, oh, the Garo armor is a reference to the Golden Bat. And then, of course, the spin-offs are better. We just went over the spin-offs in many ways. We went over Zero, Black Blood, and things like that. So generally speaking, it's okay. It's okay. It'll give you your Garo fix for the day, and you can move on if you're really, really needing your Garo fix that day. But that's really all I have to say about the 2005 to 2013 Koga or Raiga series. That's about it. That's really it. It's a rich kid with the Garo powers. That's it. Versus Road, I simply will not dignify with a response. It is not a Garo story, it is a Battle Royale story featuring a Matrix meets Sword Art Online storyline of people who get sucked into an MMO-like world through VR, and if they die in the game, they die in real life, where they have superhuman powers. It's a enjoyable show if that's what you want. It's not a Garo season. Okay, so now let's go through actually my criteria of what a bad Garo season would be like. An angering or frustrating main character, childish or endlessly immature. Not a focused story, basically something that doesn't really know what it wants to be. Does it want to be coming of age? Does it want to be a hero's journey? What does it want? And then finally, the storyline generally drops A or B plots without any kind of emotional resolution or catharsis. And all of that describes perfectly Crimson Moon. God, I hate Crimson Moon. I don't even remember who the main Garo was. This entire list, this entire video, has been done scriptless and from memory. I don't remember who the main Garo knight was. You know who I do remember? Mei. Mei is the name of the Makai priestess who literally controls whether or not the kid is allowed to open his armor. Which is... it's in lore, that doesn't mean it's good writing. Yeah, every season the powers change a little bit, but having a Makai priestess be able to seal and unseal the armor so the kid can't use it? Not to mention there's an entire drama plotline about the kid's father that just kind of gets dropped halfway through, and we don't learn about it again. Anyway, the point is that when it comes to Crimson Moon, it's just not a good show. If you really do want to watch it and it's your last resort for Garo media, go ahead and go in. It is something that really should have been very easy to get right. And the easy way it should have been gotten right, because it's a Garo series that takes place in feudal Japan. A Ronin or Samurai Garo is the easiest thing in the world to do. And they even failed at that. They were given, no pun intended, gold to work with as a premise, and they even failed at that. Eventually you meet Zero the Silver Wolf in this one, and man, it's like the armor is just worse. The armor is made in this kind of effeminate, doe-eyed way in both cases, in which he looks more like a furry than he does a knight with the whole wolf head, and it's just no. Garo Crimson Moon. I almost say don't watch it, but I'm just a random guy on the internet. If it's your last resort, and you're really, really desperate for more Garo media, you can go after Crimson Moon. In short, if you are a Japanese citizen who grew up with Super Sentai, or you're an American citizen who grew up with Power Rangers, and you're looking for something that appeals to an adult audience rather than a childlike one, and instead of messages about sharing is caring, you instead get messages about what will happen if you don't sort of live up to a civilizational duty, yeah, Garo is for you. It's really, really good, and you should watch it in the order that I said. It's all very, very good. I love it. It's the most wonderful thing. And I always get excited about it when I see it in other things. That's why when I saw it in Final Fantasy XIV, I had to make a video about it. And honestly, a Garo season that takes place in a sort of fantasy punk universe is something that I am begging for. Something that literally takes place in the Final Fantasy XIV universe. Because we already have things like, in the Shadowbringers DLC, you have Sin Eaters. Sin Eaters are basically horrors, and then you also have other types of creatures that are basically horrors as well. Very good stuff. Not to mention, the powers change every season, so what about the season in Final Fantasy XIV? What are the great dark pacts that could be made? Maybe they're Reapers, the Reaper class gone wrong. That would be very interesting, but regardless, that was my take on all the seasons that I have seen of Garo. This isn't all of Garo, especially with the movies. There are movies out there that you can absolutely find and enjoy that weren't on this list, but I hope this gives you a good introduction to the series, and I hope this gives you a good watch list to go out and enjoy. Have a great one. Have a great night. Thank you all for watching, and have a lovely night.